She did not think about the consequences. That was the problem with Delphine Voss. She never did.
Stellan Vane is not who you think he is.
Who is he? Someone I have been watching for a long time.
Or what? I stopped pretending I have any reason to be careful with you. This isn't finished. It is. You just don't know it yet.
The Ashworth Club on a Friday evening in October was the kind of place that smelled of money and old leather, where candlelight turned everyone golden and beautiful.
She did not think about the consequences. That was the problem with Delphine Voss. She never did. She thought about the dare. She thought about her friends laughing behind their champagne flutes, about Rosalind's whispered challenge, about the way the whole table had gone quiet and electric the moment someone pointed to the man sitting alone in the corner of the Ashworth Club and said, "Him, kiss him, if you dare." She thought about winning. She did not think about what it would cost her. The Ashworth Club on a Friday evening in October was the kind of place that smelled of money and old leather, where candlelight turned everyone golden and beautiful, and where the wrong words spoken too loudly could ruin a family by morning. Delphine knew she was slightly out of her depth. Her family was respectable, her father's textile business comfortable enough, but this room was built for men with titles older than most countries. She had been brought as Rosalind's guest, which meant she was tolerated but not truly welcomed. She was used to that. She smoothed the front of her deep Bordeaux gown, lifted her chin, and crossed the room. The man in the corner had not moved in the 20 minutes since their table had noticed him. He sat the way certain men sat, not relaxed, not tense, but utterly still in a way that took effort to maintain and years to perfect. Dark coat, no decorative flourishes. His face was angular and severe, black hair swept back from a high forehead, and his eyes, when they finally lifted to meet hers as she stopped at his table, were the color of frozen water. Not cold, colder than cold, the kind of cold that had survived something. "Excuse me," Delphine said, because she was raised to be polite even when doing something reckless. He did not speak. He simply looked at her, and the looking was so complete, so total, that she felt briefly as though she had been taken apart and catalogued. She leaned forward. She kissed him. It lasted 3 seconds. A press of lips against the corner of his mouth, the faintest contact, more statement than sensation. She pulled back. She began to straighten. His hand closed around her wrist. Not roughly, not painfully, simply, definitively, as though she had picked up something that belonged to him and he was reclaiming it. "Sit down," he said. His voice was low, perfectly even, the kind of voice that never needed to be raised to be obeyed. "Please." The word please did not make it a request. Delphine looked back toward her table. Rosalind had her hand pressed over her mouth. The others were wide-eyed, delighted, the way people are delighted by disasters that happen to other people. She sat down. "My name," he said, releasing her wrist with the same measured precision with which he had taken it, "is Nikolai Ashworth." The name landed in the air between them and seemed to change the temperature of the room. Delphine knew the name. Everyone in London with any awareness of the social landscape knew it. The Duke of Ravenscroft. I am 34 years old, never married, rarely seen. When he did appear in a room, other men found reasons to be somewhere else, and the reasons were never spoken aloud. "I know who you are," she said, because she refused to be the woman who stammered. "Good," he looked at her steadily. "Then you understand that what you just did was either very brave or very foolish. My friends dared me." Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, the ghost of the idea of one. "And you always accept dares, only the interesting ones." The not quite smile held for a moment, and then it was gone, and something else took its place. Something measured and calculating and utterly without warmth. He looked past her toward the entrance of the club, where 2 men in dark coats had appeared. One of them caught Nikolai's eye. A small nod passed between them, invisible to anyone not watching for it. Delphine was watching for it. "I need to ask you something," Nikolai said, his attention returning to her with that same total unsettling focus. "In the last 5 minutes, did anyone approach you, before you came to my table? Anyone you didn't recognize?" "No," she said slowly. "Why?" He studied her face as though checking her answer against some internal record. Then he reached into his coat and produced a small white card. Plain, no crest, just a London address engraved in clean type. He set it on the table between them. "Go back to your friends," he said. "Have your carriage brought around. Do not walk. Do not take the underground. Go directly home. A pause. And if anyone follows you, send word to that address. Delphine stared at the card, then at him. You're not serious. I am always serious. He said it without irony, without drama, as simply as one might say it is raining. Go home, Miss Voss. Tonight was not the night for this. She picked up the card. She stood. She wanted to say something sharp and memorable, something that would let her walk away from this table having won some small exchange. But the look in his frozen water eyes stopped every word she formed. He was not threatening her. He was frightened for her, which was somehow infinitely more alarming. She walked back to her table. Rosalind grabbed her arm immediately, vibrating with excitement. What did he say? He told me to go home, Delphine said, still looking at the card in her hand. And are you? She looked back across the room. Nikolai was already speaking to the two men in dark coats, his posture unchanged, his voice inaudible. But one of the men was looking at her, just for a moment. Then he looked away. Yes, she said quietly. I think I am. She did not yet know that the moment she had kissed Nikolai Ashworth, someone else in that room had been watching, someone who recognized the gesture for what it was, intimacy, however brief and invented, and who had decided, in that instant, that Delphine Voss was now a useful thing. She did not know, but she would. If this opening pulled you in, you are exactly where this story wants you. Stay with us. What Delphine is about to discover about Nikolai Ashworth will change everything she thinks she understands about power, protection, and the price of a single impulsive moment. The carriage came within 4 minutes of her stepping outside. That was the first thing that felt wrong. She had not sent word to the driver. He had simply appeared, as though he had been waiting, as though someone had told him to be ready. She climbed in without questioning it. The London streets slid past the rain-blurred windows, gas lamps smearing gold across the wet cobblestones, and Delphine sat with Nikolai Ashworth's card between her fingers and tried to arrange the evening into something that made sense. It refused to arrange. She arrived home to find her father still in his study, which was unusual. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, and the relief on his face was immediate and too profound to be explained by a daughter returning from an evening out an hour earlier than expected. You're home, he said. I'm home, she agreed. Papa, is something wrong? He hesitated. The hesitation lasted precisely long enough to tell her everything. Nothing that needs to concern you tonight, he said, which was the answer of a man to whom something was very much wrong and who had decided his daughter should not know about it. She went to bed. She did not sleep. At 10 the following morning, a package arrived. No card, no sender's address, just her name on the outside, written in handwriting she did not recognize, and inside, wrapped in plain brown paper, was a copy of the collected works of Anne Bronte, a first edition in better condition than she had ever hoped to find, the exact volume she had been searching for in every second-hand bookshop in London for the past 4 months. She stood in the entrance hall holding it for a long time. Then she went looking for the delivery boy and found that there wasn't one. The package had been left on the step. She thought about frozen water eyes and the way he had said go home as though the words cost him something. 3 days passed. On the first day, she saw him at the National Gallery. He was standing in front of a Dutch interior painting, apparently alone, his hands clasped behind his back, looking at the painting with the same total attention he had given her in the Ashworth Club. She stopped in the doorway of the gallery. He did not look at her. She told herself it was a coincidence. The National Gallery was not a private club. Anyone might be there. And she turned and walked to a different wing. On the second day, she saw him outside her brother William's club on St. James's Street. He was on the pavement, speaking to a man she didn't recognize, and he was there for only a moment before a carriage collected him and he was gone. She told herself again. Coincidence. London was not as large as it felt. On the third day, she found him in her favorite bookshop on Cecil Court. This time she did not pretend. She walked directly to the shelf where he was standing, Natural History, which surprised her, and she said without preamble, "Why are you following me?" He took a moment to close the book in his hands, set it carefully back on the shelf, and turned to face her. He was even more striking in daylight, without the flattery of candlelight. Sharper, more real. "I'm not following you," he said. "I'm making sure nothing is following you. Is there a difference?" "A significant one." She studied him. He met the study without flinching, without performing discomfort, without any of the social shuffling men usually did when a woman looked at them too directly. He simply stood there and let her look. "The book," she said. "The Bronte, that was you." He said nothing, which was its own kind of confirmation. "How did you know I was looking for it?" "You mentioned it to the bookseller here 18 days ago. He didn't have a copy. I found one." She absorbed this. 18 days ago. He had known of her existence for 18 days, and she had known of his for 3. And he had spent those 18 days paying a quality of attention to her that no one, not her family, not her friends, not any of the men who had briefly courted her, had ever paid. "Why?" she asked. The word came out smaller than she intended. Something moved behind his eyes, something that was carefully and deliberately kept from his face, pressed back behind the controlled surface of him the way you press a hand against a wound. "Because someone in that room 3 nights ago recognized you as someone I had allowed near me," he said, "even briefly, even unplanned. That makes you a variable in a situation you didn't ask to be part of. I don't leave variables unprotected. I'm not a variable." "No," he said quietly, "you're not." The bookshop is very small. They were standing close enough that she could see the faint line of a scar along his jaw, nearly invisible, old and long-healed. She wanted to ask about it. She didn't. "Who was in that room?" she asked instead. "Who noticed?" "Someone I have been managing for a long time," he said. "Someone who looks for weaknesses." "And I'm a weakness?" He looked at her for a long moment. "You were supposed to be a coincidence," he said. "A dare. Something that lasted 3 seconds and meant nothing. And now?" The silence stretched, and in the silence she heard everything he wasn't saying, heard it the way you hear music from a room you're standing outside, muffled but unmistakably real. "Now," he said carefully, "you are something I find myself thinking about with a frequency that is inconvenient for someone in my position." She should have been alarmed by that. She should have said something sensible, something that put distance between them. She was a respectable woman, and he was a man whose presence cleared rooms. Instead, she said, "Have tea with me." And Nikolai Ashworth, the Duke of Ravenscroft, who had not done a spontaneous thing in 11 years, said, "All right. The slow burn has begun, and you already know this is not going to end neatly. Something is coming for her. Something that Nikolai has been fighting alone for a very long time. Subscribe so you don't miss the moment everything changes. It is coming sooner than Delphine expects." His name was Lord Stellan Vane, and he arrived in Delphine's life on a Tuesday afternoon wearing a charming smile and carrying flowers she hadn't asked for. She was in the garden when he called, sitting on the low stone bench near the roses, reading the Bronte book that she still hadn't been able to explain to her mother. And William brought him out without warning, already laughing at something Stellan had said, already comfortable in the way men were comfortable with other men who knew how to make themselves likable quickly. Stellan Vane was perhaps 30, with fair hair and easy manners and the particular gift of making whoever he was speaking to feel like the most interesting person in the room. He was a viscount's son. He moved in the right circles. He was, by every conventional measure, exactly the sort of man Delphine's mother would have approved of. She disliked him immediately and spent the rest of the afternoon trying to understand why. He called again on Thursday and Friday, each time with something small and well-chosen, a volume of poetry she had mentioned once in passing, a box of chocolates from a specific shop she had visited 2 weeks ago, a posy of the exact flowers she had said she preferred over roses. He was paying attention, the same way Nikolai paid attention, except it felt different. With Nikolai, the attention had felt like something weighty and true, like the attention of a man who saw things clearly and could not pretend otherwise. With Stellan, it felt like performance, perfect, practiced, polished to a high shine that, if you tilted it slightly in the light, reflected nothing behind it. She said as much to Rosalind, who thought she was being impossible. "He's handsome, he's titled, he clearly adores you, and you're comparing him unfavorably to a man who told you to go home," Rosalind said, in the voice she used when she had run out of patience. "Nikolai didn't tell me to go home because he wanted me gone," Delphine said. "He told me because he's mysterious and brooding, and that is doing something to your good sense," Rosalind interrupted. "Delphine, Lord Vane has invited you to his estate for the weekend. His estate. Go. Be sensible. Forget the terrifying Duke." She went. She told herself it was because Rosalind was right. Sensible, reasonable, the correct choice. She told herself Nikolai Ashworth was a man she had kissed on a dare and spoken to 3 times. Nothing more, and the strange gravity she felt in his direction was not real, not founded in anything solid, and certainly not worth turning down a perfectly lovely invitation. She did not tell herself that she was hoping Nikolai would appear and give her a reason not to go. He did not appear. She arrived at the Vane estate on Saturday afternoon. It was beautiful in the way of houses built to impress. Grand proportions, immaculate grounds, every surface indicating wealth without shouting it. Stellan met her at the entrance and was perfectly attentive throughout the afternoon tour, perfectly charming at dinner, perfectly pleasant as the evening conversation stretched across the table between the 12 assembled guests. She was seated 3 places from Stellan, which meant she was not seated beside him, which meant she was seated beside Lord Gideon Hart, who talked exclusively about his horses, and she spent most of dinner nodding at appropriate intervals and letting her attention drift. It was during the second course that the room changed. She felt it before she saw it, a subtle shift in the air. The way conversations near the door stuttered and recalibrated, the way Stellan's pleasant expression went through something and came out the other side changed, still smiling but different behind the smile. She turned toward the door. Nikolai Ashworth stood in the entrance of the dining room, still in his greatcoat, as though he had arrived directly from somewhere that required urgency. His eyes swept the table and found her in approximately 1 second, and the finding was so immediate and so complete that the entire length of the room suddenly felt much shorter. Stellan rose to his feet. "Your Grace." His voice was perfectly controlled. What an unexpected. "Forgive the intrusion," Nikolai said, not sounding particularly sorry. He moved into the room, and the men along the table did the thing that men always did in his presence. They straightened, or they shifted, or they became very interested in their plates. He walked to Delphine's chair, stopped behind it, and placed one hand on the back of it, just his hand, resting there, barely touching the frame of the chair she sat in. It should not have meant anything. It meant everything. He looked at Stellan across the length of the table, and something passed between them, old and unspoken and charged with a history she didn't have access to. "Miss Voss," Nikolai said, without looking at her, still holding Stellan's gaze. "I apologize for disrupting your evening. I need a moment of your time." "She's a guest here," Stellan said, pleasantly. "Whatever you need can surely—" "She's not available," Nikolai said. The words dropped into the room with the particular finality of something that cannot be taken back. Delphine stood up, not because she was told to, not because Nikolai had asked her to. She stood up because something in the line of his jaw, the specific quality of tension she had learned to read in him, the way his hand lifted from the back of her chair with a precision that looked like control and felt like restraint, something in all of that told her that whatever was happening was not a social call. "I'll be a moment," she said to the table, and followed Nikolai out of the dining room before she had time to think better of it. In the corridor, out of earshot, she turned on him. "You have no right to speak for me," she said. "Not yet," he said. 2 words, said without arrogance, without possession, said the way a man says something he believes to be simply and plainly true. "Not yet." She stared at him. "Nikolai, what is happening?" He looked at her for a long moment. In the candlelight of the corridor he was very close, and she could see the tension in him more clearly than she ever had before. Something beneath the controlled surface of him that was pressed very hard against something it could not quite contain. "Stellan Vane," he said quietly, "is not who you think he is. Who is he?" "Someone I have been watching for a long time." A pause. "Someone who does not pursue women out of interest, Delphine. Someone who pursues them because of who they are connected to." She felt the cold move through her before she understood it. "He's pursuing me because of you." "Yes, because I kissed you in that club." "Yes." She pressed her hand flat against the wall behind her, steadying herself against the sudden rearrangement of everything she had understood about the last 2 weeks. Stellan's flowers, Stellan's perfectly chosen gifts. All of that careful attention, all of that practiced charm, and none of it had been about her at all. "Tell me," she said. "Tell me everything." He opened his mouth, and then his pocket watch chimed. A small, sharp sound, and he went very still in the way she had learned meant something had arrived that he could not ignore. He looked at her. His jaw was tight. "Not here," he said. "Not in his house." He reached for her hand, and the touch was not possessive this time. It was urgent. "Trust me long enough to get you out of here, and I will tell you everything." She looked at his face. She read it the way she had been teaching herself to read it, past the control and the severity and the frozen water composure, into the thing underneath it. He was frightened for her. "All right," she said. "Let's go. Something is wrong. Something has been wrong since the night she crossed that room on a dare, and Nikolai has been carrying the weight of it alone. You are not going to want to miss what he tells her next. Subscribe, leave a comment, tell us, did you trust Stellan? Because you shouldn't have. The truth came out in pieces. She learned it the way you learn things that change you. Not all at once. Not in a clean revelation, but in layers, each one heavier than the last, until the accumulation of it pressed the breath from her chest and left her sitting in Nikolai's study at midnight, her hands folded in her lap, utterly still. He sat across from her, not behind his desk but in the chair opposite. A deliberate choice, she understood. A refusal to put the architecture of power between them when he was about to ask her to believe in him. He was the Duke of Ravenscroft. That part was true. He was also, for 11 years, the single most consequential figure in a network of intelligence, influence, and enforcement that operated beneath the visible surface of London society. Not criminal, or not entirely criminal, but operating in the space between law and justice that formal institutions couldn't reach. His father had built it. His father had died in it. Nikolai had inherited both the title and the empire at 23, before he understood what either one cost. I have never heard anyone who did not first make themselves a threat to someone who couldn't protect themselves, he said. He said it without drama, without seeking her approval. Simply as a fact he had decided she deserved to know. I'm not asking you to think of me as good. I'm asking you to understand the difference between what I am and what I am not. And what are you not? She asked. Indifferent, he said. To consequences, to the people inside them. His eyes held hers. To you. She absorbed this. My father's company, she said slowly. 3 years ago, he almost lost everything. There was a contract that fell through, a supplier who defaulted. He told me a benefactor stepped in, someone anonymous. Nikolai said nothing. That was you, she said. Still nothing. You protected my father's business before you ever met me. She heard the strangeness of it in her own voice, the weight of it, the reaching backward quality of care that had existed in the world before she knew it was there. Why? Your father, he said quietly, is an honest man. There are fewer of those than you might think, and they are worth more than most people understand. She stood up. She needed to move. The room was too small for what she was feeling, too quiet for the noise inside her chest. She walked to the window and looked out at the dark garden, the stone paths silver under the moon, and she thought about Stellan Vane's flowers and his careful attention, and all of it pointed at her like a weapon she hadn't known was a weapon. She thought about Nikolai appearing at the gallery, the bookshop, the dinner. Always there, always at the edge of her life, never asking for anything, only watching to make sure nothing reached her. She thought about the book. I need to know something, she said, still looking at the window. Ask it. Was this ever about protection, just protection? She turned to face him. Or was some part of it, some small, inconvenient part, something else? He looked at her for a long time. The controlled surface of him was very, very still. You were supposed to be a dare, he said finally. You were supposed to be there for 3 seconds and nothing. But you sat down. Something moved in his face, the thinnest fracture in the composure, there and gone. You sat down and you looked at me like I wasn't something to be frightened of, like I was just a man sitting alone at a table. He paused. No one has looked at me that way in a very long time. She crossed the room. She stood in front of him, and he looked up at her from the chair, and something about the angle of it, her standing, him sitting, the rare geometry of him being lower than her in any space, felt significant. Tell me about Stellan Vane, she said. All of it. What does he want? Nikolai's jaw tightened. He wants to take what I've built apart. He's been trying to for 6 years. He can't touch the title, can't touch the empire directly. I've closed every legal door he's found. A pause. But if he can find leverage, someone I've allowed close, He stopped. Someone you care about, she finished. He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. Then I'm leveraged, she said. As long as I'm near you, he can use me against you. Yes. And your solution was to stay near me anyway. My solution, he said carefully, was to make sure he never had the opportunity to reach you, which requires me to know where you are. She looked at him. She thought about all the careful, impossible distance he had maintained, the cards he hadn't sent, the things he hadn't said, the way he had never once reached for her when she could see plainly that the reaching was right there under the surface of him, controlled and contained and tremendous. "That is the most complicated way to care about someone that I have ever encountered," she said. He almost smiled. "Almost. I'm a complicated man. Nikolai." She said his name the way she had been afraid to say it before, plainly, without the social buffer of his title. If something. The door burst open. Thomas, his most senior man, appeared in the doorway. His face was carefully blank in the way of men trained to deliver bad news without expression. "She left," Thomas said. Nikolai was on his feet before the sentence finished. "Her carriage," Thomas said, "was stopped on Brentwood Lane. The driver was sent back. She's been taken to Vane's warehouse on the Thames." The silence lasted approximately 1 second. "Get the carriage," Nikolai said. Delphine's heart had gone cold and then hot and then cold again. She had been so focused on the conversation, on the fragile and impossible thing taking shape between them, that she hadn't finished the sentence. She hadn't said, "If something happens to me while I'm walking back into Stellan's house to collect my things, do you have a plan?" She had not gone back for her things, but she had stepped out to the gardens for air before Nikolai's man arrived at the estate, and she had been alone for 3 minutes. 3 minutes was enough. "I'm coming with you," she said. "Absolutely not. She is my friend," Delphine said. The word came out harder than she expected, edged with a fury she hadn't known she was carrying until this moment. "Rosalind followed me to the Vane estate because I asked her to come. She is there because of me. I am going." Nikolai looked at her. Then he made a decision she could see happen in real time, a recalculation, a surrender of the refusal that would have been the safe and sensible answer, a choice to treat her not as something to be protected from the world, but as someone capable of standing inside it. "Stay behind me," he said. "Whatever happens, stay behind me." "Yes," she said, and they went. Hold on, because what Nikolai does next, what this man, feared by every powerful person in England, does for a woman he has known for 3 weeks, is the moment this story becomes something you will remember for a very long time. Don't leave. Subscribe if you haven't. Share this with someone who needs to hear a story like this one. He went alone. She learned afterward that he had sent Thomas and 2 other men to the warehouse entrance, had taken a second route himself, and had walked through the side door of Stellan Vane's Thames warehouse without a weapon she could see, without backup at his shoulder, without the armor of numbers. She was told to wait in the carriage 3 streets away. She lasted 6 minutes. Then she got out. The Thames in October smelled of cold water and iron, and the warehouses along the bank were dark except for one, a low light bleeding through a high window, just enough to see by. She moved along the wall, her heart very loud in her own ears, her Bordeaux gown entirely wrong for this kind of night, and she told herself she was not being reckless, she was being necessary, which was a distinction she was choosing to believe in. She heard Stellan's voice before she reached the door. Through the thick wall it was muffled, but the tone of it, bright and amused and completely without warmth, carried. Then she heard Nikolai. She couldn't make out the words, but she knew the voice, knew its register and its particular quality of absolute steadiness, and something in her chest that had been clenched since Thomas had delivered his news eased by a fraction. He was there. He was speaking. He was still standing. She found the side door unlocked, which she understood later was because Nikolai's men had cleared the exterior and left it so, and she pushed it open and stepped inside. The warehouse was large and dim, lit by several oil lamps set at intervals that created pools of amber in the surrounding dark. Stellan stood in the center of the space, still dressed for dinner, his fair hair and pleasant face entirely at odds with the men arranged behind him. Rosalind was to his right, seated in a chair, pale but unharmed, her eyes going wide the moment she saw Delphine. And Nikolai. Nikolai stood opposite Stellan with 6 feet of stone floor between them and his hands loose at his sides, and he was looking at Stellan with an expression so completely without emotion that it was more frightening than rage would have been. Delphine. Her name in his mouth was low, immediate, and absolutely controlled. He did not look away from Stellan. Go to Rosalind, she went. She crossed the space, put her hand on Rosalind's shoulder, and watched the two men across the room the way you watch something that could go several ways depending on forces you don't fully understand. You've made your point, Nikolai said to Stellan. You have my attention. You've had it for 6 years. What you don't have is a position that doesn't end badly for you. A pause. Let them go and I will pretend this was a negotiation rather than what it actually is. And what is it actually? Stellan asked pleasantly. An error, Nikolai said. An expensive one. Something shifted in Stellan's face, the pleasant surface of him cracking at the edges, showing the thing underneath that had always been there, that Delphine had almost seen but never quite looked at directly. Something that was not warmth and had never been warmth. You've spent 11 years, Stellan said, making sure no one could touch you. Titles, connections, the whole magnificent invisible network. He tilted his head. But you've never cared about any of it, have you? Not really. Not until... His gaze cut to Delphine, brief and sharp. A girl kissed you on a dare. Walk away, Nikolai said. Or what? Or, Nikolai said very quietly, I stopped pretending I have any reason to be careful with you. The silence that followed was the kind that decides things. Then Stellan stepped back, a small, precise movement. He said something to the men behind him that Delphine couldn't hear, and they moved, not aggressively, but in the way of men standing down, reshuffling, making space. This isn't finished, Stellan said. It is, Nikolai said. You just don't know it yet. Stellan walked out. The men filed after him. The warehouse doors closed. And then there was only the lamplight and the sound of the river and Rosalind making a small, broken sound that she immediately tried to turn into something more composed. And Nikolai finally, after what felt like a very long time, turned around. He crossed the warehouse in 8 steps. He stopped in front of Delphine. He said her name. Just her name, nothing else. Delphine. And the way he said it was so completely different from every other way he had said everything else that it nearly undid her. Not controlled, not measured. Just her name, said by a man who had been very afraid and was only now allowing himself to know it. She reached up and put her hand against his face. He went very still. The way people go still when they are touched in a place they have protected for a long time. I told you to wait in the carriage, he said. I know, she said. You were 3 minutes behind me. I know. His hand came up and covered hers where it rested against his jaw. His eyes closed for a moment. When they opened, the frozen watercolor of them was different, still gray, still deep, but something had moved in them. Some sheet of ice had shifted, and what was underneath was not cold at all. Ask me anything, he said, low and rough and entirely without his usual precision. I told you that before and I meant it. Whatever you want to know, I won't hide from you again. I know, she said, for the 3rd time, and she didn't ask anything. Not yet. She just stood there in the lamplight with her hand against his face and let him breathe. She found him. She walked into the dark and she found him. And now, finally, after all of this, the dare, the watching, the fear, the warehouse, the name said in the dark like a prayer. They are going to have the conversation that changes everything. We are almost at the end. Stay. They stayed at the warehouse until Rosalind had steadied herself, which took less time than Delphine expected, because Rosalind was, beneath her softness, made of something strong and practical, and until Thomas had returned with a report that the exterior was clear and the carriages were ready. Nikolai's estate was 40 minutes from the city. The ride was quiet. Rosalind fell asleep against Delphine's shoulder within 10 minutes. The particular collapse of someone running entirely on the dregs of their nerves. Delphine sat with her friend's weight against her side and watched Nikolai across the dim interior of the carriage. And he watched her back, and neither of them spoke until the lights of the city fell away, and there was only the dark countryside outside the windows. Your brother will receive a letter tomorrow, Nikolai said at last, quietly enough not to wake Rosalind, explaining that some business matter required my assistance tonight, nothing that implicates you in anything irregular. Thank you, she said, but that's not what I want to talk about. He waited. You said you would tell me everything, she said. I said that. Then tell me why. She held his gaze. Not the logistics, not Stellan, not the empire, not the inheritance you never asked for. Tell me why you kept appearing. The gallery, the bookshop, the dinner. You could have sent a man to watch me. You didn't have to come yourself. He looked at her for a long time. long enough that she thought he might not answer, might fold back into the controlled silence he carried the way other men carried titles, as a kind of armor. Because, he said finally, I did not want information about you, I wanted to know you. The distinction settled over her like something warm. No one has interested me, he said, in a very long time. I had decided that the work was enough. The purpose was enough. 11 years of that is. He paused, searched for the word, and seemed faintly surprised not to find it quickly. It is a long time to spend in a room with no windows. And then someone kissed you on a dare, she said softly. And then someone kissed me on a dare, he agreed, and looked at me afterward like I was just a man. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, something older and more private than that. I did not know how much I missed being seen that way until you did it. Delphine thought about the book, the way he had listened to a sentence she had said to a stranger in a bookshop and acted on it 18 days later, the way he had watched over her from a distance for weeks, carrying the weight of her safety like something that belonged to him, like something he had chosen rather than been assigned. Nikolai, she said, I am not afraid of what you are. He looked at her very carefully. I want to be clear about that, she continued. What you've told me, what I've seen. It changes things I understand about the world, but it doesn't change what I understand about you. She paused. You are a man who built walls around other people, who watched from outside to make sure nothing reached them, who sent a book to a woman he barely knew because she was looking for it and he could find it. She held his gaze. That is not a man I'm frightened of. The carriage hit a slight dip in the road and swayed, and the motion brought them both fractionally closer in the small space, and Nikolai reached out and steadied her, one hand on her arm, brief and careful, and then he didn't let go entirely, just held on. I'm not planning, she said. You said that. I am not a variable or a convenience or an asset in whatever calculation you're always running. I am not something you need to manage. No, he said, you're not. Then stop managing me, she said, and just tell me what this is. Between us, without the architecture around it, without the protection and the strategy and the 11 years of distance from everything that might matter. She leaned forward slightly. Tell me what this is for you. He was quiet for so long that the carriage had begun to slow before he spoke. When he did, his voice was lower than she had ever heard it, stripped of the particular precision that was his habitual armor, down to something raw and real and not quite controlled. It is the first thing in 11 years, he said, that I have been afraid of losing. She looked at him, at his face in the dark, the sharp jaw and the frozen water eyes that were not cold at all, not really, that had never been cold, only careful, only guarded, only protecting something underneath them that was tremendous in its intensity and entirely without practice in being given. Then don't lose it, she said. He turned her hand over in his, and she felt his thumb move across her palm, and the smallness of the gesture after everything, after the warehouse and the fear and 11 years of rooms with no windows, made something ache behind her sternum in a way that was not painful. Thomas's voice came quietly from the driver's box. They had arrived. Rosalind stirred, lifted her head, blinked at both of them in the dim light with the expression of someone who had missed several important developments and was rapidly catching up. Right, Rosalind said, with remarkable composure. Good, he told her. He said the words, the first thing in 11 years that I have been afraid of losing, and if that didn't reach something inside you, we don't know what will. One, and that is everything. 6 days later, Nikolai Ashworth did something that no one in London society was prepared for. He appeared at the Marquis of Harbridge's autumn ball, an event attended by 400 people, every significant family in the city, 3 foreign dignitaries, and every gossip correspondent who could get their hands on an invitation, and he walked in alone, which was unremarkable, and then crossed the ballroom directly to where Delphine was standing with her mother and William, which was very remarkable indeed, and he said, with no preamble and in a voice that carried, Miss Voss, I wonder if you would do me the honor. The orchestra was between pieces. The timing was, she would think about this later, either very good luck or very deliberate, probably deliberate. Probably everything Nikolai did was deliberate. She had not been warned. She had spent the previous 6 days in a state of suspended uncertainty. She had seen him twice, both times briefly, both times with other people present, and he had been warm in the precise and contained way he was always warm, and she had told herself that the carriage ride had been real, that what he had said had been real, that she had not built something enormous from a few quiet words in the dark. And then he appeared in the middle of the most public room in London and asked her to dance. She gave him her hand. The orchestra, with the particular instinct of musicians who understand that they are occasionally participants in history, chose a waltz. He danced the way he did everything, with economy and precision and an underlying intensity that had nothing to do with performance, and everything to do with the fact that when Nikolai Ashworth paid attention to something, he paid it completely. "You didn't warn me," she said. "No," he agreed. "You walked into a room of 400 people and—" "Yes, Nikolai." He looked at her steadily. His hand at her waist was correct in every technical sense and entirely electric in every other. "Stellan Vane," he said quietly, "is going to make one final attempt. Not a kidnapping, something more damaging. He's going to use what he knows about me to discredit the title, to create a legal challenge to the dukedom." He held her gaze. "The one thing he can't challenge is a man's right to his own household, his own family." She felt the understanding arrive before the words did. "If you are here," she said slowly, publicly, unmistakably, as the woman I am going to marry," he said, "then anything Stellan attempts against the title becomes an attack on a family, and the crown does not tolerate attacks on ducal families from men with no title to their name and a warehouse on the Thames." She stared at him. "That is the most romantic and simultaneously the most infuriatingly strategic thing you have ever said to me." Something happened to his face. Something she had been trying to catch a glimpse of for 3 weeks finally arrived in full, a real smile, unhurried and unguarded, transforming the severity of him into something that made her lose her place in the steps of the waltz. "Delphine," he said. "Yes, strategy is real," he said, "and so is the other thing." She thought about the first thing in 11 years I have been afraid of losing. She thought about the book on her doorstep in the gallery and the bookshop and the way he had said her name in the warehouse like it was the only word in him that still had warmth in it. She thought about a man who had built walls around other people for 11 years and had no practice at all in letting anyone build anything around him. She stopped walking. In the middle of the dance floor, with 400 people and one scandalized orchestra around them, she stopped and looked at him. "Ask me properly," she said. He stepped closer. He lifted her hand from his shoulder and held it in both of his, and the gesture was so different from anything she expected from him. So simple, so nakedly genuine, that her throat tightened. "Marry me," he said, quiet and direct and without ornament. "Not because it's useful, not because of Stellan or the title or any of it." He held her gaze. "Because you sat down when you should have run, because you walked into a warehouse in the dark, because you looked at me like I was just a man, and I have spent 34 years waiting for someone to do that." A pause. "Marry me, Delphine." She felt the room around them at the edges of her awareness, the whispers, the turned heads, the rustle of 400 people witnessing something they hadn't been invited to witness. She didn't care about any of it. "Yes," she said. He closed his eyes for one moment. Just one. Then he opened them, and he was looking at her with something so unguarded and so tremendous that it was almost impossible to look at directly, the way you can't look directly at certain kinds of light. He raised her hand and pressed his lips against her knuckles. Not a social gesture, not performance, just that. The orchestra, bless them entirely, kept playing. 6 months later, on a wet November morning in the chapel of Ravenscroft House, Delphine Voss became the Duchess of Ravenscroft in a ceremony attended by 40 people she loved and trusted, which was 40 more than Nikolai had expected to have when she asked him about it. She wore deep ivory. She carried no flowers. She had told the florist, politely and firmly, that she found the tradition redundant when the setting was already beautiful, and she planned to spend the ceremony paying attention to her husband rather than managing a bouquet. Nikolai, when she appeared in the chapel doorway, looked at her the way she had learned to read him, past the composure, into the thing underneath, and the thing underneath was everything. She walked to him. She stood beside him. The vicar said the words, and at the end of them, before Nikolai could execute whatever correct and measured gesture he had planned, Delphine reached up and kissed him first, the same way she had in that bar, 3 seconds, a statement rather than a question, except this time he kissed her back, And this time the whole room knew who he was, and this time she did too. She had been dared to kiss a stranger. She had done it without thinking about consequences, which was always her particular problem and had turned out to be, in this one specific instance, the best decision of her life. Nikolai told her once. Much later, in the quiet of the library at Ravenscroft, where she had reorganized every shelf, and he had watched her do it with an expression of complete contentment, that he had known from the moment she sat down that she was going to be impossible to manage. And yet, she said, and yet, he agreed, here we are. There is a lesson in this story, not about dares or kisses or men who keep their emotions pressed behind composure like something precious they don't know how to give away. The lesson is this: sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay in the room, stay when you should probably run, ask the question when it would be easier to be quiet, say yes when the answer is inconvenient and wonderful and real. Delphine stayed, and Nikolai, for the first time in 11 years, let someone in. That is enough. That is everything. If this story stayed with you, if Nikolai's quiet devotion or Delphine's particular kind of courage moved something in you, please leave a comment below and tell us which moment was the one that got you. Was it the book on the doorstep, the warehouse, or that final impossible smile in the middle of a ballroom? Subscribe to stay inside stories like this one. Share it with someone who needs to hear that being seen, truly, completely seen, is worth every inconvenient, terrifying, wonderful moment it costs. We will see you in the next one.